One thing that drives me crazy, people listen to podcasts, they scream and yell, they pound on the table, and then they don't act. The framers of our Constitution expected us and the founders of this country to be active, engaged citizens. That doesn't mean you vote. That's a bare minimum. It means you vote and then you participate.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews and Aaron Baird joining you today. And wow, what an unexpected week, to say the least. I don't think anybody had World War III on a radar.
I honestly, and the more you read about the situation in Iran, the more this is how it had to if it was going to happen, this was how it had to happen, right? Where the long talks after, years out, even going before the president, just breaking down again and again and again, being lied to again and again and again by the Iranian regime. And as is President Trump's way, when the opportunity presented itself, he went all in. And again, the world's very different today than it was just a week ago.
Yeah, literally happened in the middle of the night. I know. I was running sound at church on Sunday morning and gone to bed Saturday night. Everything was fine. Woke up and saw that social media was talking about a message the president had delivered like 2 or 3 hours before, and I was up at 6 a.m.
Right.
Like, what happened? And seeing that the strikes not only occurred but were successful in taking out the dictatorship there, and a lot of key leaders in Iran, like, just
in the middle of the night for us, but middle of broad daylight for them.
Yeah,
right. That's the story there, as it's been reported, is that there was just a meeting of key leaders in a particularly vulnerable situation. And again, I remember early on when Trump came in, the left started making fun. I can't remember, what did TACO stand for? Trump. So there was some acronym that they used with called TACO with Trump, where it was all about how he would bluff. Essentially, I'll have to look it up and have it for the next time. But he would like make threats and then not follow through on those threats. And you look at, again, in all of those things, you look at what happened with Maduro and now with Iran. He's being serious when he says these things. For me, though, when I look at where we are today, all I think about is my mind goes back to two different places. One, think back to October 7th, 2023, when Hamas launched their huge attack on Israel, killing over 1,000 people, all the kidnappings, all backed by Iran. There was a Free Press article about this where you wonder what Ayatollah Khamenei would say today if he saw the newspaper clippings from today back then, if they would have still made those same decisions. And absolutely not. You could, again, if you try to think about it from their perspective, that was when Biden was still in office, support for Israel was waning, there seemed to be a growing fracture between the United States and Israel. They saw weakness and they pounced, right? This is how people think over there, right? It's such a different world than the Western world, but they saw weakness in Israel and in Israel and America, and they tried to take advantage of it. And to go from that to the complete devastation of Hamas, the complete devastation of Hezbollah, and now Iran with their leadership cut off. Everything I'm reading right now, regime change seems, I pray that it happens. It seems really far-fetched. It seems like it's going to be really difficult to have something like that happen. The Iranian people have been oppressed and murdered. But there's a reason why all of these, like even your best Muslim majority country still has a lot of oppression going on, because the people actually that's how they want to live under Sharia law, right? I don't want to say they want to be oppressed, but they want to live in a country where women aren't allowed to walk outside without their heads covered. So the president's obviously a realist on this. I especially trust J.D. Vance on these things being very realistic about what can actually happen there. But this sequence of events that played out since October 7th did not go the way Iran thought, certainly.
No, not at all. And it seems like part of the U.S. motivation here, at least according to comments made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in recent days, was that they knew Israel had some sort of attack planned and that the likely counterattack from Iran was going to target U.S. troops in the area. So preemptive in that nature. There's so many moving parts as we get more information here. But, I have seen some commentary online about the constitutionality of this.
Yep.
Like, should Congress have been involved in the decision? And you're a little more versed in the civics area, and maybe not specifically declarations of war, but what are your thoughts on just that topic?
By all means, this area in particular is not an area that on the constitutional side that I've studied robustly. However, broadly speaking, on these types of issues, the whole concept of a commander-in-chief, right, of this individual being a civilian being over the military. You look at this specific situation where somebody who has said outright multiple times for decades that called for death to America, called for attacks on our country, attacks on our troops, has funded and driven attacks on American sovereignty, has plotted to try to assassinate our country's leader. Right? We know all of that. This is not a vague situation. This individual has
harbored and funded terrorists.
Yes, that have executed plans to harm our nation and our allies and our military. That individual was in a vulnerable place for us to take action and protect ourselves. Our ability as a nation to be able to jump on that and not have to go to Congress and announce, "Hey, everybody, we need to go to protect that," like that. That cannot be what the War Powers Act dictates, right? Because otherwise, America is completely hamstrung from defending yourself. And again, this is why we have an election where we put a commander-in-chief in place who is ultimately accountable to the people, right? It would be incorrect, and that's one of my problems with the way I'm hearing people talk about the War Powers Act right now, be incorrect to say President Trump is not accountable in this situation. And again, now that there's a broader debate to be had that I think is more serious about, so how long can he do these things? How long can the military operate in these situations? I would say very clearly in a situation like this, it's in the nation's best interest that he can finish the activity to protect us. I get that. And so there's a question of degrees here that is a worthwhile and a serious constitutional debate. But a lot of what's obnoxious about it, there are people like Rand Paul who I disagree with him, but he's at least consistent across administrations. Democrats weren't crying War Powers Act when Bill Clinton bombed Kuwait, and when Obama used drones and all these types of things. You didn't see those same conversations. But for the most part, it's hard to imagine a serious argument to say that the president should not be able to protect our country in this way when an opportunity like this presents itself.
Yeah. And the bigger issue is, as I see it right now, is now that the act has been done and you referred to regime change, like it is hard in these situations. And we've seen a number of situations historically. I'm specifically thinking of like Afghanistan in the late 80s after the CIA pulled out aid from there and the war with the Russians had kind of dwindled down, like left a power vacuum. Right. And that allowed the Taliban to move in. So I'm by no means am saying that they should not have removed a dictator from Iran, but the chances that another dictator comes into power is highly likely.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that, again, I think that's one of the things that the president and Secretary Rubio and especially Vice President Vance are very realistic about, especially compared to, there's been a lot of really good writings comparing what's happening with Iran to what happened with Iraq in the early 2000s. I think a few things. One, there is no, I think, serious conversation about, we're going to bring democracy through and everything is going to, it's going to become, Mar-a-Lago of the Middle East, right? Like that, I think there's a very clear eyes about the nature of the enemy we have today. I think a few things. One, the pure devastation of their military capability. That's one of those things. The same thing with the 12-day war. Same situation we're in right now. The devastation of Iran's ability to wage war, to launch rockets, to build a nuclear weapon, to enrich uranium. Setting that back as we have is a massive win in and of itself, just for the protection of the country. There's also, I keep going back to October 7th on this because the weakness projected is what incentivized the action against Israel. That is the power dynamics of the Middle East. When I was out there with AIPAC and before that with a seminary and better in Israel, better understanding how the power dynamics work. There's a reason why every time, if there was a little, personal drone-powered rocket being flown over from Hamas that was going to do no damage, there was a reason why Israel always came back with severe and devastating force on wherever that came from. Because the moment that you do not react strongly is the moment they are emboldened to go further, harder, and deadlier. Mm-hmm. What you're seeing as a result, not just of October 7th, but just the Trump administration coming in is a reminder that this real power exists. And if you want to remain in power in the Middle East and you're making these outright threats and you're designing these plots to kill American soldiers, to try to kill the president, there's consequences for that. That alone, just America showing its seriousness and might and strength and intel is a massive, important message for the long-term security of the country.
Yeah. And the intel piece really stands out for me as well when you think of how orchestrated it was for that exact moment, that exact time, with that many leaders in one space at one time and being decisive to act. And certainly intel played a part in the Maduro situation. And then even going back further just to the Israel side, the beeper.
The beepers, exactly. Oh, man, I think about that all the time.
That was such a great piece of intel.
The thing I think about with the beeper situation is how many similar, that we will never know about, right? How many similar, like far off their plots have been built up and executed and then, went nowhere, right? Because you think about the beeper situation, they had to one, identify, okay, these guys use beepers. Two, they had to figure out where do they get the beepers from. Three, they had to figure out how to create some type of shell company to get, so the odds of just one thing go like, oh, well, that guy, oh, he wasn't working the phones that day, and so his buddy called the other beeper manufacturer and bought him there, and so all of this work and money would have just gone out the door. It never would have been used, right? Like there's so many like ways that plan could have gone sideways, and it just makes me amazed at how many little things are being moved all the time in hopes that something like that could go off. It's
we need the movie version.
Yeah, exactly. Seriously.
Of what happened there.
Yep.
Well, coming back stateside to look at some big news that came out of the Supreme Court this week. Essentially, it's a ruling on a case that was coming out of California where we've talked about it. Students are being transitioned at school. The schools are keeping that information from their parents, and they're using different pronouns, different names, allowing for social transitions at schools. And California was allowing that, no surprise, but some conservative parents groups spoke up against it, ultimately ended up in the Supreme Court's hands, and the Supreme Court ruled with the side of the parents. Did I summarize that correctly?
That's essentially
the broad strokes.
That's essentially right. So shout out to Thomas More Society for taking this case on. The reason why it seems like it came out of nowhere is that it was on the emergency docket for the Supreme Court. So that's when sort of quick justice is needed, right? When there's not time, there's a call from a district court, a court of appeals, a circuit court from a court of appeals to say, hey, we think this is particularly egregious, this decision that came down. We need the Supreme Court to provide clarity to defend basic rights. there can be a sort of an emergency docket hearing where it's not full briefing or any of those types of things. And that's what this situation was, right? So parents sued in California. They went to the district court level. They won there. The Ninth Circuit took the case, and they lost there, and they did basically an emergency appeal up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the good guys won 6-3. For an emergency docket case, though, there's two aspects of this. On the one hand, and this is, you can see especially in the opinion and dissenting opinion, you have the liberal justices criticizing the conservative justices for basically issuing such a powerful ruling on an emergency docket case that has massive implications. They are 100% right about that. That is what happened here. This is going to be one of the most pivotal parents' rights cases in American history, right? That just fell on us. I mean, I can't overstate how big this decision was, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that was Kagan's accusation against the majority for what they did here. However,
I'm just shocked that she dissented.
Go figure, Kagan and Jackson Brown and all these guys. Brown Jackson, I mean, all the it's not. Who could have ever imagined they wouldn't be with us? It is insane though that they're not with us, and the reason why it was an emergency docket decision and the Supreme Court justices felt comfortable doing this is it's such a fundamental principle. Right? This is a fundamental idea of who has the right to direct the upbringing and education of their children. Like, it reminds me a little bit of how we were talking about the debate at the City Club, or the conversation I did at the City Club, where, I kept saying, like, none of the questions, there's hard questions for us to get. None of those questions were asked to me at the City Club. There's hard questions for the Supreme Court to wrestle through. What are the boundaries of the state's interest to protect children and parents' rights? Like, there's hard ones. This isn't one of those, right? You can't perform trans procedures on kids without their parents' knowledge and consent. And that's what was happening in these schools. Was they were socially transitioning these kids. They were even recommending that they start looking into mental health services. And for them, mental health services are puberty blockers and hormones, eventually leading to even medical transition. I want to read a few powerful lines. This is from the SCOTUS blog that quotes the decision. They said the reason why the majority ruled for the parents was that the state's policies interfere with the rights of parents to freely exercise their religion. The state's policies, which permitted keeping these procedures and these mental health services related to gender transition from parents, allowed schools to keep secrets from parents. The reason these policies are subject to the most stringent constitutional test, known as strict scrutiny, was because they substantially interfere with the right of parents to guide the religious development of their children. Moreover, the majority added, parents have long had primary authority with respect to the upbringing and education of their children, including the right to not be shut out of participating in decisions regarding their children's mental health. Guys, that's at the core of everything we've been doing for the last kind of 10 years. Right? This is the culmination of, again, what seems common sense to all of us, that no teacher should be allowed to do this to kids. Nobody should be allowed to do this anyway, but especially without parents' knowledge or consent. But there are loud voices that think it's not only that it's okay that it happens, that it's immoral if it doesn't happen. And this case just shuts all that down.
Yeah. It was surprising and big news that happened all at once. And I mean, it's good to see the Supreme Court starting to weigh in on this kind of stuff, because ultimately more and more of these cases are going to end up in front of them anyway, right?
Well, and so that was one of Kagan's points, where she said, hey, one of these cases is on our way up. And Justice Coney Barrett, in a rebuttal to that, was like, yeah, but this is a clear-cut case. We should just answer this now. The other thing about this, Mike, though, is, yeah, this is California. I think none of us are surprised to see this out of California. But we had a situation just like this in central Ohio, like, happen not too long ago. This was one of the first cases that came up in our schools. And actually, the policies in Ohio school districts was to keep these decisions from parents, right? That was the overt, like we had a situation at a Hilliard school district where in a Hilliard school where a teacher was in class and a student said to him that he wanted to go by girl pronouns, and so that teacher was on a call or in a meeting later that week with his colleagues, middle school teacher, I believe, no, high school teacher, and said to his fellow teachers, hey, just so you know, this student brought this up to me. I'm going to let the parents know. Wasn't even like trying to be like, no, I'm not doing this. All of that was just like, I'm just going to let the parents know. The next day got called to the principal's office with the school district's legal counsel and was told, you are not allowed to tell the parents about this. And they said because they have an obligation to protect the student's right to privacy, which these are minor children, right? The parent is responsible for them, right? I mean, honestly, we just had a case from Florida this week where there was a mass shooting. A kid conducted a mass shooting and got the gun, was able to get the gun because of his dad. His dad didn't know he was going to do it. His dad didn't give it, but the dad is now going to prison because he did not rightfully stop his child from killing 2 teachers and 2 students in his Florida school district. That's the level of responsibility we have as parents. That's a just decision.
You're either responsible or you're not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this issue is this is one of the reasons why I'm always like, I don't care what, Hilliard is not seen as a big liberal bastion. I don't care where you are in the country. These policies were being implemented in your public school. And this decision is a landmark that shuts it down. And we need to make sure every school district knows about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just reinforcing that rightful role of parents in their child's lives. And it's really no surprise that this is the game plan, is to try and separate the child from parental authority and to get them to doubt their own parents' authority in their lives. Like, that's how they gain a foothold with these bad and frankly impossible ideas.
Yep.
It's the only way you get buy-in on it. Like, your parents are wrong. And it sounds a little bit familiar. Like, did they actually say?
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. It's totally
it goes back
demonic.
to the original
Exactly.
lie.
But also, how creepy is that for parents to be saying, or for students to be saying, oh, you don't need to tell your parents. Don't tell your parents. That's gross, man. Like that's, if an adult is saying that to a kid, that adult does not need to be anywhere near a classroom.
Yeah. 100%. Well, this has been a couple of major stories we needed to cover. We're going to pivot now to our interview for this week, and we've got a great conversation with Mark Meckler coming up.
Yeah,
He's with a
love
group
Mark.
called
He's awesome.
Convention of States, and this is a really interesting concept. And honestly, I hadn't heard a thing about it until you brought it up as a
Nice.
guest we needed to have. And I really enjoyed the conversation with Mark and what he's trying to do to basically just rein in government, rein in the excess in government.
Mark is a solutions guy. He's the only guy I know in America, genuinely, who has a real plan and is putting real strategy and effort behind actually reining in the growth of the federal government. Everybody else, I know that everyone loves to talk about this. Everybody loves to run on this as a politician. No one's actually doing anything about it except Mark Meckler, Mike Ferris, and the guys at Convention of States. It's been an issue that's been around for a while. And we've not really jumped in on it before at CCV just because we had so many other things going on. But I have such respect for what Mark's doing, and I do see the massive growth of this administrative state as such a threat to the long-term stability of our country and our families. It became time for us to speak out in favor of Mark's movement. So, yeah, it's a great conversation.
Yeah, it's really enlightening. It's going to be beneficial to you, and it's coming up next on The Narrative. You're invited to join Center for Christian Virtue for our 2026 Columbus Celebration Gala on Saturday, April 11th. It's going to be a great night where you can join us to celebrate what God is doing through CCV. We're excited to welcome our keynote speaker, Scott Jennings, who is CNN's senior conservative voice and one of the sharpest commentators in the national spotlight. He's known for his clarity, conviction, and humor. And Scott brings decades of experience at the crossroads of politics and media, including service in the George W. Bush White House and key roles in multiple presidential and Senate campaigns. It is going to be an elegant evening where you'll enjoy an incredible dinner followed by visionary keynotes exploring the path forward for the future of Ohio and America. Do not miss it. Sponsor a table today. Visit ccv.org/gala for more information. That's ccv.org/gala.
If you've got something to say, we want to help you say it. I'm Vince Tornero. Since 2018, Wessler Media has helped churches, organizations, and events amplify their message through podcast, video, and social media. We also happen to produce the narrative too. Let's talk. WesslerMedia.com. WESSLER Media.com.
Mike Andrews, Aaron Baird, David Mahan, joined now by Mark Meckler, who's a constitutional activist and co-founder of several organizations to revolutionize the American government, including Convention of States Action, Citizens for Self-Governance, and Tea Party Patriots. He appears regularly on a wide variety of television outlets, and we're grateful for this opportunity to talk to you today, Mark, about the Convention of States. Thanks so much for the time and being a guest with us on The Narrative.
Hey, it's really great to be with you guys, and I admire the work you guys do. Been such consistent warriors there alongside us. I was thinking about this before we started and pointing specifically at Aaron. I travel all over the country. I deal with state-based folks who are in the fight in a particular state. What's super interesting to me, they come and go a lot. And, so I'll go to a state and there'll be a group there that's sort of in the center of the fight for a couple of years. And then I come back and they're all gone and somebody else is reconstituting. And there's nothing wrong with that. Aaron, you've been in the fight as long as I've been in the fight. Like, if I'm going to Ohio, I know I'm going to find Aaron Bear in the middle of the fight. I know that if I run to where the gunfire is, I'm going to find you in the midst of the smoke, and the barrel's going to be red hot, and all I got to do is step up next to you. So I just appreciate y'all for always being in the fight.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Mark. And honestly, not to make this all a love fest on the front end, but genuinely, I'll say the same from the other perspective. There are a lot of groups that, especially national groups, that make a lot of noise. But when the fight starts, they're nowhere to be found. And that's what I've appreciated about COS, Mark, and all the work that you do with Convention of States, is because even if it's not directly Convention of States, I remember on the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports Act, the massive grassroots network you guys have were some of our first people. Contacted their lawmakers, calling for the veto override, but even before that, being involved in the mix. So appreciate you, brother. Appreciate what you guys do.
Well, Mark, let's start at the very top. We've used the name of the movement a couple of times, Convention of States. Can you unpack that for our listeners? Give us a little bit of a civics lesson on Article 5 and what you're attempting to accomplish through the Convention of States.
Yeah, I would start with this. I'd ask a simple question of people do you think that you should decide things for yourself and your family, or do you think a bureaucrat thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. should decide? Now, I already know the answer. All of your listeners are going to say, no, I want to decide for myself. By the way, that's true of the left and the right. Almost everybody wants to decide for themselves, and they think they're best to decide for themselves. We happen to agree with that premise, and the country was built on that premise. And so when those guys sat down and they drafted the Constitution, the framers, one of the things they did is they wanted to create a way to amend the Constitution in case they needed to, in case things happened that they didn't foresee. And a lot of stuff has happened they didn't foresee. And so in the draft that came up for signature 2 days before the end of convention, they gave Congress the power to propose amendments, but they hadn't given that exact same power to the states and to the people acting through the states. And thank God, Colonel George Mason from Virginia stood up and he said, look, we have a problem. We gave that power to Congress. We didn't give it to the states. And he asked a question, are we so dumb, so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes tyrannical will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Now, we don't have video. I really wish we had video. I'm sure they all slapped their foreheads and went, oh my God, of course we have to do this. And so they proposed that they give this power to the states in Article 5. And so the way it works is the federal government, whenever 2/3 of both houses of Congress wants to propose an amendment, you reach that 2/3 threshold, and then they put that amendment out to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. So the method that was created for the states is essentially the same. Whenever 2/3 of the states say they want to gather in convention to discuss proposed amendments, then you can gather in convention. And your reason for gathering in convention has to be very specific. It's what's called germaneness. You have to prove that all these things aggregate, that they're the same. And you do that by having resolutions in each state that are the same. So it takes 2/3 of states to pass the resolution. It's just the House and the Senate, no governor's signature necessary. It takes 34 states. That equals 2/3 of the states right now. So far, 24 states have done it with our resolution. And to be specific about it, our resolution calls for discussion, just discussion of 3 things. Anything that would impose term limits, and that's not just on Congress, but it's on all federal officials. So that would mean what you and I would consider the deep state, staffers, bureaucrats, people who are there 40 years, in addition to Congress. And we're going to talk about anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, like a balanced budget amendment, tax caps, spending caps, preventing unfunded mandates being imposed on the states. And then the third thing is anything that would limit the scope and power of the federal government. And that means going back to something like the original Constitution. I don't understand why the federal government went from 17 enumerated powers to 17,000, however many there are, because those are not in the Constitution. And so we want to get back to a very limited vision of the federal government that was the framers' original vision. So that's what the Convention of States Project is all about, using that Article 5 power to call a convention to propose amendments, ultimately to restrain the tyranny of the federal government.
So, Mark, you're saying right now 24 states have done this. We need to
20
get to 30.
out of 34.
20 out of 34. Okay, so we need to get up to 34. Right now, this is here in Ohio. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is this has been something that has been coming up in Ohio for a number of years. It's not been something that CCV has leaned in particularly on. But honestly, after seeing the work that you've been doing, what Convention of States has been doing, and frankly, even now with we've had the Doge experiment that did a lot of good, right? That we've had some good things, but even seeing a president in Trump who wants to pull back the federal government from all of these various areas we're in, and the limited ability he has. The reality is, without something like a balanced budget amendment, we're never going to restrain the federal government. It's going to be a continual talking point that Republicans run on, but have no game plan. This is the thing that ultimately brought me to a place that says, okay, CCV needs to support the Convention of States, is because this is an actual strategy to pull back the federal government, to restrain the federal government's moves in our lives. And so it's why I wanted to have you on to tell folks we support this. We need more people getting behind this. But where are we in Ohio to get this done? And what's it going to take to get this over the line?
Yeah, Ohio is an interesting case study for us. I think support is pretty broad in your legislature in both houses. We've been told by Senate leadership that this is the year that they intend to get it done. My wife was out there a few weeks ago at a fundraiser, and there were a bunch of people, a bunch of legislators at the fundraiser, mostly senators, and they said they have been instructed to get it done this year. So I expect we're going to see that happen first in the Senate, and then it'll move over to the House. And the real question in the House isn't whether we have the support, it's whether they will prioritize action on this. And look, one of the leaders that I most respect in any state legislative body in the country is Matt Huffman. That guy is an incredibly effective legislative leader. He knows how to keep his caucus together. I think he knows how to count votes as well as anybody. He knows how to build coalitions within the caucus. Just an impressive guy. And obviously he's been back and forth between the houses, so he knows both houses. The real question is, will Speaker Huffman prioritize it this year? And if he decides to, it'll get passed. Now, I say that it's really important that you understand, I'm not criticizing Matt Huffman at all. He's been a supporter of Article 5 and using Article 5 since before I was. And that's saying something because I'm an old timer. And I always say this whenever I get on a chance to get at a rally with Matt or get on stage with him, is he's one of the few people I can honestly say he's been around Article 5 longer than I have. He's been in this fight. And so he's always been a supporter of the movement in general. Just the question is his legislative priorities. Everything that they do in a legislature takes time and takes political capital. And it's up to the leadership to determine what they're going to spend their time and their political capital on. And I think if Speaker Huffman decides that he's willing to put some elbow grease into this, We're going to get it done in Ohio this year. And by the way, I don't have to tell you this. Ohio's important. And I don't say that to all the girls. Ohio is Ohio, right? It is a gigantic state, population-wise, geographically. It's right in the middle of the country. In politics, lots of people watch Ohio. If you look at, this last presidential election, Ohio played an outsized role. Obviously, you have the vice president. You had Vivek Ramaswamy running for president. I mean, I don't know what's in the water there, but you guys are doing pretty good. Let me just put it that way. And so for us to get it passed in Ohio, that's a watershed moment for us. So we're putting a lot of effort into it this year.
Yeah, David Mahan is also in Ohio, which we
That's
all
a
know.
big deal right here, right? Yeah. Not quite,
know-
just a notch below JD, but then it's Mahan.
Shout out
Yeah.
to JD.
Close.
Holla at your boy. So I was walking through the Senate one day, and there was a lot going on in one of the committees, and I looked in the room to say hey to some folks, and I saw two brilliant individuals. Mike Ferris was in there on one side of the issue. Alan Keyes was on the other side. Two men that I highly respect and appreciate for their work for this country, who stood on very different sides of this issue. One, why has this taken so long? And two, why do brilliant guys like Alan Keyes, what would be some of their arguments against the Convention of the States?
So I'll deal with those one at a time. Why is it taking so long? Because the framers wanted it to take a long time.
Okay.
They set up a process that was very difficult. And the reason that they did that is because, like you and me, they revered the Constitution, the document they had created. They believed that they had set up the best form of government ever known among mankind for the preservation of liberty. That's what they told us. They said they had created a republic if we could keep it, and they were worried about whether we could keep it or not. And what they didn't want is for folks to change the Constitution easily, for it to be willy-nilly. Every year there's changes to the Constitution. There are places where that happens all the time. California is a place where pretty easy to change the Constitution. I think there have been over 300 changes. Their Constitution's now an entire book. It's not what you and I would
That's
think
how
of as
Ohio's is. Yeah.
Ohio,
Yeah. Same
Okay,
thing.
so that's not healthy, and the framers didn't want that. They wanted the Constitution to be the basic fundamental law of the land, so they set a bar that was very high. How high is that bar? There's no higher bar in the entire system of American governance. Think about it. Getting a 2/3 vote in any legislature, super hard. That's a high bar. Now imagine you have to get 2/3 of the state legislatures just to agree to meet, right? So you got to go out to all 50 states. You got to work all 50 states to get that done. That takes millions and millions and millions of people putting pressure on their legislators to support this process. And when you first bring it to legislators and you say Article 5, they're like, I don't know what that is. Like most people have never even heard of this process. Even today, I've been doing this for a while. I would say the majority of legislators who come in, probably 60%, are unfamiliar with the idea of calling a convention of states. High bar, you got to get over the lack of knowledge, and then you got to get over the fear. And so, which will take me to the second part of the question. Mike Ferris, genius. Alan Keyes, genius. Here's the way I would distinguish them on this issue. The number one expert in the United States of America, probably in the top two, I'd say, because Rob Natelson is up there, is Mike Ferris. I mean, this is his subject. He has spent probably 15, 18 years studying this inside and out. He's read everything that's ever been written about it. He's written the definitive law review articles on it. This is the guy that knows this subject better than anything. Alan Keyes, not true. As far as I know, never written a piece on it, never spoken about it, except for that one time in the legislature that I'm aware of. Never seen a recorded speech of him on this subject. It's just not in his main subject matter area. And so I think he's just mistaken on some of this stuff. And again, it's not to take away from his intellect. We can't all be experts on everything. But, if I have a root canal problem, I go to a root canal doctor. I don't go to a general dentist. Like, I want the guy that does nothing but root canals all day long. That's the guy that I'm going to trust for advice. And so they ended up on different sides of this issue. Now, why would a smart guy like Alan be wrong on this issue? And I'm saying this with all due respect, and I don't mean that facetiously. He deserves our respect. Here's why he would be wrong. The main argument made by people who are opponents of this would include Alan Keyes, is that we have to worry because there could be a runaway convention. You guys have probably all heard this argument, right? A runaway convention, for your listeners, means we're going to call the convention for the three purposes that I just said, but they're going to get in convention. They're going to do whatever they want, and they're going to run crazy. I hear the one I hear all the time is they're going to do away with the Second Amendment. So if you're Alan and you're a hardcore constitutionalist and you love the Constitution like he does, that's pretty terrifying. I don't want anybody messing with our Constitution. I think that would be horrible. And so then the question you have to ask yourself, if you're a conservative, I think there's a fundamental difference in the way we think our way through problems and the way the left thinks their way through problems. It's most captured in Ben Shapiro's phrase that facts don't care about your feelings. And the left's like, oh, I'm afraid, and so I'm going to go on that. Or, oh, I feel empathy, so I'm going to go on that. So the argument that we hear about the runaway convention is a fear-based argument. It's not a rational argument. And then as conservatives, we always want to know, and as Christians, we should know our apologetics, right? What's the basis for our faith? Not just that we have faith, but what's the basis for our opinion that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior? Where do we get that from? And I think that we as conservatives naturally tend to think that way. Like, I want to know, where's this runaway argument come from? Like, who invented that argument? I would bet money and to deference to him that Alan doesn't know where that argument came from. And I'll tell you where it came from, and I think he would be horrified to know this. Chief Justice Warren Burger, that name might be familiar to you. He tied to the year 1973. The guy who signed Roe versus Wade as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's who Chief Justice Burger is. And he coined the term runaway convention. Why? In a letter between himself and Phyllis Schlafly, another brilliant woman who he'd become friends with. They're both on the Bicentennial Commission for the Constitution. They'd become friends, a little bit of an odd friendship, but, we know that Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were friends too. So I'm not surprised by that, not critical of that. But she asks that Chief Justice Burger what he thinks of the idea of a convention. At the time, multiple states are calling for conventions to overturn Roe versus Wade. It's a movement. It ultimately got the same place we're at, 20 states. So what do you think Chief Justice Burger is going to say about the idea of a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade? He says, well, that's a terrible idea. In fact, we could have a runaway convention. Now, this is the first time in American history the term runaway convention is even used. They are afraid that the right is going to use the Constitution to save the Constitution. They know they got to stop it. So Burger says what he says, and he gives that in a letter, now what I would describe as an infamous letter to Phyllis Schlafly. And I think I love Phyllis Schlafly. I love her legacy. It's a little bit sad that she took advice from the guy who gave us Roe versus Wade on this issue. A little bit ironic. But she circulates that among folks on the right. Burger goes out to those bastions of conservatism, Harvard and Yale, recruits a couple of law professors to write articles about the runaway convention. And the myth of the runaway convention is born. And unfortunately, that's a mind virus that has affected some folks on the right for a very long time. And you don't have to believe me about that. That's all historically documented. And then if you want to know how that affects us in the current age, go to Common Cause's website and search Convention of States. And what you'll find is dozens and dozens of pages, millions of dollars spent demonizing what we're doing. This is the number one leftist organization in America for policy, funded by George Soros. And you know what their main argument is? Their number one argument? Runaway convention. The exact talking points used by a few people on the right. Now, okay, so I've just told you the origins of the argument. I've told you that it's made its way. 250 groups, by the way, signed on to that piece by Common Cause. That includes La Raza, MoveOn.org, Planned Parenthood, Daily Cause, Hillary Clinton. Like, you guys know those names. It is literally every single leftist organization in America of whose name you would know is on that list. Now, I never say that the left tells the truth because they almost never do. But on their webpage, it says that what we're doing is the most dangerous thing that could happen in America. I don't agree with that, but they say because we intend to reverse 115 years of progressivism. Yes, we do. And so they pinpoint it. And now, so that surprises me because in answer to your question, it doesn't seem like a guy like Alan Keyes should be on the same side of an argument as La Raza, Planned Parenthood, MoveOn.org, and Code Pink and all these orgs. And in fact, when I talked to David Horowitz, God rest his soul, when he was still alive, he was against what we were doing, much like Ellen was. And he asked me why I thought he was wrong. And I gave him that basic argument. And when he heard all the people who were against it, he goes, wow, I should be for you, shouldn't I? And then he did his research and he came around and he wrote an article in favor of what we're doing. So that's why I think Ellen gets there. But now let me defeat the argument. And it's pretty simple. 34 states have to agree in advance what the convention is about. They agree on something limited. They pass the same resolution. That's a supermajority in convention. So I've never had anybody explain to me how you get 34 states. They all sign the same document. They all agree what to talk about and what they can't talk about. They go to convention. How does a minority suddenly take control of convention and get outside of that? That doesn't make any sense. You're going to have a super majority going to convention that have all agreed what the framework of a convention is. Now, let's say, I don't know what happens. I'm originally from California, so I imagine they're going to bring a lot of weed and they'll be partying hard. And those guys, I think you guys just legalized it there too, didn't you? So I don't know. Maybe you have some of the same people. Maybe they get out of control at convention. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me logically, but maybe they do. Now you got to get 26 states to agree on something that those of us who are on this podcast wouldn't like. How do you get that when 34 states have agreed to talk about only these three things? Well, let's say something happens. I don't know. Stuff happens. People are strange. Well, let's go to the Second Amendment because that's the one I hear most. So you get 26 states that decide they're going to propose the repeal of the Second Amendment, let's say. Now, it takes 38 states to ratify. When it comes out of convention, it's only a suggestion. It's actually, it has no binding force. It doesn't change the Constitution. It's not law. You have to get 38 states to ratify. So now it goes out to the states to ratify. First of all, many orgs like yours, you guys would sign an amicus brief saying, wait, that's outside of the call of the convention, right? It's you and everybody else. Alliance Defending Freedom, we would litigate, everybody would litigate that. We lose all those litigations. Now you got to get 38 states to ratify. That means only 13 states to say no. Do you know how a legislature says no to ratification? They don't do anything. Nothing. Like literally, there's no hearing, there's no testimony, there's no submission. That's like, they just don't do anything. Now, you guys work in a legislature enough to know that the easiest thing for a legislature to do on something controversial,
That's what they do best is nothing. That's
exactly.
Honestly.
So all you need.
Do you agree with that, David? Is that your experience?
No comment.
Yeah. Well, so all you need is the 13 most conservative states in America and only one House and one committee in the 13 most conservative states in America to do nothing, and you can't ratify the repeal of the Second Amendment. By the way, here's some good math. I'm a lawyer, so you might want to check my math. 29 states currently have constitutional permitless firearms carry in their states, right? Meaning go buy your gun, put it in your holster, and carry it immediately. 29 states have that. 24 states allow you to carry your handgun in the legislature. I've done it in most of the states where you're allowed to. I'm proud to say in Texas, we have a fast pass lane for people with firearms. You bypass the line, you show them your ID, you go right in. So welcome to Texas, yeehaw. And then there are 14 states. Now, this is unbelievable to me. 14 states where you could take your AR, chamber around, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. Now, people will tell you who are opposed to what we're doing, oh, they're going to do away with the Second Amendment. Really? Really? In what universe? And so I'll make an offer to your listeners because there's going to be skeptics that are listening to you guys, and I understand. Here's my offer. This is my personal email address. It's mmeckler, MMECKLER, at conventionofstatesaction.com. If you're worried about this and you're a skeptic, then just send me an email and tell me what amendment you're worried about. In general, layman's terms, you don't have to draft it legally. And then list the 38 states that will ratify it. So I've been making that offer for 13 years. I've received precisely 0 emails. It's just not possible. And so what happened is people like Ellen, unfortunately, got caught up in the fear part of it. Sounds really scary. They're going to do away with the Constitution, and didn't do the deep dive in the research to understand it's literally impossible for there to be a runaway convention.
Well, and Mark, thanks for unpacking all that because that's just from the beginning, even the first time we met, you walked through all of that, like it makes it so clear the fear behind this is just not grounded in reality. But the other thing I'd ask those same people is, what's your actual game plan to deal with, what are we at, 20 trillion in national debt right now?
38 trillion we just
38
passed.
trillion. 38 trillion in national debt right now. Like, what is the actual, like, we elected Trump, we won the Senate, we won the Congress, and we're not going anywhere closer to dealing with that debt. And it's one of those things that everybody knows is a national crisis, something that our kids and their kids are going to be stuck with and having to figure out how to deal with. I was at an event a few weeks ago, and I was texting with you, Mark, and hearing all of these people, talk about what their biggest concerns are, and so many came back to national debt. And the reality is, this is the first actual solution I've heard out there to go after that problem, more than just campaign talking points, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that is one of the things I say to our opponents. And by our opponents, I mean the good faith ones on the right, is what's your solution? And there's a couple of things that I'll hear regularly. The one that I hear the most is, we just need to pray more. And I just say, hallelujah, yes, amen. All day, every day, continuously, however much you pray, you should pray more. And we should pray for our government and our leaders. And how's that working out for us from a government perspective right now? And the answer is, it's not. And then the second thing they say is, we just need to elect better people. My first vote was for Ronald Reagan. I was 18 years old. And so how's that been working out for us since I was 18? And the answer is, every single one of those governments, including Reagan, who I revere and admire, grew the size and scope of government. So if I want government to get smaller, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, the definition of insanity. Those are the two. Oh, the one more I hear is, what we should be doing is educating people. Like, people are not educated enough. And I say that's always true. We could always do more education. The framers expected this of us. What we're engaged in right here, this project, is the largest constitutional education project in the history of the United States of America. So hallelujah to more education. But then my question to them is, how are you going to fix the problem? And usually I get the deer in the headlights look. And you mentioned balanced budget amendment, and I want to be really careful about that, because there is a group out there that's pushing nothing but a balanced budget amendment. I mentioned the three things we're doing: term limits, fiscal stuff, and scope and jurisdiction. I am very against the idea of a balanced budget amendment alone. I'm a true federalist. I want a separation of powers between the states and the federal government. And what happens is, if you pass a balanced budget amendment alone, the federal government will impose so many more unfunded mandates on Ohio. They're just going to say to you, they're not going to do away with their programs. What do you think? They're going to be nice? They're just going to say, well, that's fine. You guys aren't going to give us the money. Then here's the program you got to run. And you got to tax your people, and you got to run it how we tell you to run it. I think that's unconstitutional. We need to do away with the federal government's ability to impose unfunded mandates. We need to restore true federalism, which means the states have sovereignty over most things other than the things that are directly in the Constitution for the federal government. And so I'm not a fan of a balanced budget amendment alone. I think we need this package of things if we're going to fix the problems that ail us.
So real quick, and I know David had a question, but that's really interesting to me, because again, you look at when you talk about unfunded mandates, and I want to make sure I'm tracking with you here. Like, to me, the number one example of this is Medicaid, right? And so you look at Ohio's budget, our true state budget is a $60 billion budget. On top of then another $30 billion in Medicaid. So you'll often hear lawmakers talk about a $90 billion, but $30 billion, right? Think about like what the state share in education is, like $11 billion, right? We're spending $30 billion on Medicaid because 16 years ago, I remember Mark was in this fight too. Obamacare passed, or maybe 14 years ago, whenever that was, and we got the Medicaid expansion, and Kasich jumped on Medicaid expansion, took the money, and it was great money in those Kasich years, and then it starts tapering down of what the federal government's going to give you, and it's on top. Now it all falls on the state to fund that.
Yeah, and they're just going to keep doing that. They're going to shove more and more. If we do just a balanced budget alone, they're going to shove more and more of that stuff down your state's throat, and that removes state sovereignty. And I'm a big fan of state sovereignty.
Mark, what is the process for selecting delegates?
So every state does it differently. It's just one of the things I love. It's truly federalist in nature. And what happens is most states are passing what they call delegate selection and delegate limitation acts. And so that's what we're doing is a resolution. What I'm talking about when you do delegate selection, that's actually legislation has to be signed by a governor. And they'll set forth, because the legislature is in charge of that process, the way that they want to select their own delegates. So I've seen things like 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate. You know, they'll choose people they want to go. 1 from the governor, and that gives you a delegation of 5. You can have a delegation as big as you want. Every state just gets 1 vote, no matter what. You can send 100 people or 5 people, you're going to get 1 vote. So it's going to be up to the state legislature exactly how the delegation is chosen.
Mark, I'm curious as you outline what this whole process is and the difficulty, the rightful difficulty to get something like this first called and then passed. What's the outlook for it to actually happen from where you're sitting?
I'm convinced it's going to happen. And I'm not saying that as a Pollyanna. I'm saying that as a realist. It's not easy, and it's still every state is a fight. But we're seeing more and more momentum. You guys mentioned early on that where we're at right now it's absolutely unbelievable. I think when I started, I want to say that when I started doing this, the debt was at 19 trillion. Today we're at 38 trillion. So everybody's seeing that the debt's not being cut, that the federal government continues to grow. Reagan tried to do away with the Department of Education. It was bigger when he left than when he started. It's not going to fix itself in DC. So people are getting that. They're also seeing, because of Trump, I think, that things are possible that they never believed were possible. While Trump can't fix everything on his own, he's doing more than any president in my lifetime. It's hard for me to believe that I can say that there's a better president than Ronald Reagan, but I think you have to say, with just what Trump has accomplished so far in the first year of his second term now, he is, in my opinion, the best Republican president in modern history. And there's going to be a lot more, but he can't fix these problems permanently. And so I think there's more and more realization about that in the American public. And that's why our organization continues to grow over 6 million people now, because people are coming to the conclusion that we got to do something and elections aren't enough.
So let's assume for a second that this is successful, that we get the convention, that the amendments are passed. Then in your view, what does America look like because of this Article 5 provision?
That's my favorite question, because I think we don't focus enough on the dream. We, as a society, we've gotten kind of nihilistic and negative, and I'm not there. I'm super hopeful for the country. So here's what it looks like. It looks like 50 laboratories of democracy. It looks like California can go off and be as liberal as it wants, but it's going to fail. And that failure can't be federalized, meaning the cost of that failure can't be spread out, because the federal government won't have the power to do that anymore, because they're going to have to balance their own budget. They're going to have tax caps. They're going to have spending caps. And so what happens if you have a balanced budget, tax caps, spending caps, term limits? The federal government is naturally going to shrink. What happens under this scope and jurisdiction fight if we say, look, federal government can't be involved in education anymore, can't be involved in energy, can't be involved in healthcare, can't be involved in HUD. All this stuff is not in the Constitution. If you take all of that away, DC's footprint shrinks physically in DC, but also its footprint on the neck of the states, because they don't tell you what to do with your housing anymore. They don't affect your building codes anymore. They don't tell you what to do in agriculture anymore. They don't tell you what to do in energy anymore. They don't tell you what to do with your environment anymore. And that means that Ohio is free to innovate. Imagine Ohio's education system if you never sent a penny to the federal government. The way it works right now is you send billions of dollars to the federal government and they send a fraction of it back and tell you how you can spend it. How much better off would Ohio's education system be if you had total control of that system and there was no Department of Education input on all this stuff? And the same is true for all other industries. So I think what you would see is the states that take advantage of the freedom to free up their economies, to free up creativity, to free up business creation will thrive and boom. And the states that choose not to do that stuff, choose still to restrict, they will shrink. And eventually economics and population movement will force the more liberal states to come along anyway, or they're not going to survive economically.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Mark. So as we wrap up here, if somebody's interested and they want to get involved with this movement, where can they get more information or sign up, or what's the next step for somebody who wants to take action after hearing this interview today?
Yeah, the main thing I would encourage them to do, go to conventionofstates.com and click on the resources tab. Everything we talked about is summarized there. You could be an expert in 20 minutes or under, really. And then the key is sign that petition to let your state legislator know there in Ohio that you support this, that you want to see this done this year. And then this is the most important thing. Click on the Take Action tab. One thing that drives me crazy, people listen to podcasts, they scream and yell, they pound on the table, and then they don't act. The framers of our Constitution expected us and the founders of this country to be active, engaged citizens. That doesn't mean you vote. That's a bare minimum. It means you vote and then you participate in the system. So get involved. And by the way, if it's not Convention of States, that's fine. Just be involved. Be an involved citizen. If you do that, if enough of us do it, I promise you we're going to save the Republic.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.